So, we will start our coverage of our French repertoire with a very interesting line. So after the starting moves e4, e6, d4, d5, to play e5. Ambitious because white is trying to get a space advantage on the king side. And if he manages to bolster his center and then get all his pieces out, typically, something like this, given enough time, white will just enjoy the benefits of having more space, and then step by step, he will, so to say, convert his space advantage into a decisive action. Black has to act quickly and not just only make neutral moves and see what happens, and acting quickly in the sense of attacking and undermining white's center. So therefore the first logical move is c5. White, of course, bolsters the central pawn. We continue knight c6, knight f3, all very logical. And here's the first crossroads. I very much like bishop d7. It's the most flexible move. If white starts with a3, already we can go to a very interesting setup for black. So we see that a3 weakens the b3 square, and we can clamp down on the queen side. And the ensuing plan is very interesting. So bishop e2, knight a5, knight bd2. So there's a wonderful maneuver. It's knight e7, castles knight c8. We are bringing the knight to b6, so that he helps the bishop to go to f4 and take over this important diagonal where he can invade the queen side. And here we see also why queen b6 would be in the way. So if I go back a little bit, after queen b6, there is also such a line. But now, obviously, if you want to do the same thing, we would have to remove the queen from b6. It takes away the useful spot for the knight. This line with bishop d7 is a much better version of that. Now everything works out beautifully. Queen e1. Basically, white makes space to withdraw the bishop to d1. The point being that actually this a4 bishop, if it were to go to c2, it can find a home on this diagonal, and that's extremely annoying for white. So it would become the strongest bishop on the board, and therefore preemptively white has prepared the exchange. Since the bishop on d1 is awkward, black waits for white to release the pressure and improve one of black's pieces going into a4. And I believe generally this is already a very satisfactory position for black, and black has no weaknesses and long-term prospects on the queen side, because there is another popular and important option for white, namely bishop e2. Just proceeding with development. And here, like fighting against white's center immediately with f6. So obviously white will not relinquish his control of the center by taking on f6. That would be running counter to why he played e5 in the first place. So castles, changed everything here. And now we see, since black has started to fight against white's center, this pawn on e5 becomes exposed. So it's not only an asset in terms of grabbing space, but also a liability requiring defense. Bishop f4, then after knight e7, knight e2 castles. Already we can see there are ideas with knight g6. And again, it's clear that the pawn on e5 requires attention in terms of being defended. So white has this pawn, but he's also a bit tied down to a bit. And like I said, black structure is fine. The pieces will come out easily. Bishop e7, rook f8. And yeah, we can tuck away the king and then see what we do with this bishop. Sometimes it can go to c6, then we open up with d4. So there are plenty of ideas for black to improve his position and get some play. Now let's go back once more to this position after queen c7. As we saw, if white proceeds with the obvious moves, then black is kind of happy. So there's a hidden idea, playing rook e1, since now the pawn cannot be taken due to bishop h5 check, and the queen is picked up. So we castle, and now white proceeds with this interesting pawn sacrifice. c4, and I will just give some sample lines here because games have been played. It's just, an idea for white that developed over time, because I guess people were not so happy with, just going for traditionally defending on e5. So we take this guy, knight c3, knight f6, g3. Interesting. So white wants bishop f4. We go d4. Bishop f4, queen f5, and yeah, we have this extra pawn, very strong guy on d4, and here it's not so clear how white should proceed. If knight b5, We take the strong knight, play bishop d6, exchanges are good when your material up, and black has nothing to fear for. And another sample line, full piece sacrifice with bishop f3, going all out here to attack the black king. So mate is threatened, b6 forced, white tries again, gets the a7 pawn, f5 forced, queen b3, we can't let the queen in, so b5, and suddenly there's bishop d6, developing the last piece and using that the bishop on f3 is hanging, and black has a satisfactory position. So the sample lines show us that, play becomes very lively, but black is definitely in the game and has his chances, and therefore I can just wholeheartedly recommend this line starting with bishop d7 to anyone facing the advanced French. So after our first video covering the advanced French, after the introductory moves, that's kind of the starting position of the advanced French, there's one more interesting line here after bishop d7. After we've covered bishop e2 and a3, probably the most ambitious move is bishop to d3, because obviously the bishop is standing better here than on e2, but the drawback is it's standing in the way of the queen when it comes to defending the pawn on d4, and black is able to make use of that immediately. So here we are at the first crossroads. Should we increase the pressure on d4 with queen b6 or first take on d4? So the correct move is cd4, cd4, and then queen b6. And one more thing here, instead of taking back in the true Gambit style, white can castle. But this is not dangerous at all for black. We take on c3, knight c3, and we continue developing. And I believe that white has, not enough compensation for the pawn here. If rook e1, we just continue with knight g6, and then the bishop gets out and we complete development. So the last trick for white is really bishop g5. And here one just needs to find one accurate move with black and the little bomb is diffused. One nice, easy way to do it is just play a6. No one ever coming to b5 anymore, and then on the next move we can go h6, and we're just happy with black. Also, let's go back here. So this is kind of the main position, but it's not dangerous for black. So we go queen b6, castles, we take the pawn, and here the old main line used to be taking on d4, queen d4, knight c3. So now we see this motif again that, white's one idea is connected to playing knight b5 at some point. And that can be quite disturbing when we are so undeveloped with black. So just taking away this square makes it very difficult for white to find any ideas to push his initiative. And black is almost a clean pawn up. The knight can go to c6, we continue development, and it's white who has to try to show something, but it's really difficult. And as you said, taking another pawn is less advisable, because after rook e1, white's initiative is coming. If you withdraw the queen to b8, there's knight takes d5, the position opens up. If you go to d6, there's all kinds of issues after knight b5. So in comparison, here we have a position where white is having a clear play, while after a6 it's totally unclear what white should do. So that's the right move, and that's all we need to know about this position a6, and black is fine. And over time, here one more try has come up for white. It's knight bd2. So kind of supporting the well-positioned knight on f3. So my kind of guide or a guiding principle when I'm material up is I want to exchange pieces, simplify the position. The closer I get to a pawn endgame, the happier we are with an extra pawn. Here's a very interesting moment, because if we play bishop b5, we are exchanging this nice bishop on d3, but it also transpires that we get this white squares for our queen. So we are not pushed back so far. So white is making these moves with tempo, but now the queen actually has a good spot on d7, very solid. So we see immediate benefits from these exchanges. And after rook c1, knight e7, we just continue on knight c6, bishop e7, very natural development for black and nothing to fear for, I think. So today we have a special topic, the infamous exchange French. So after our introductory moves, the exchange French is when white exchanges on d5 and steers the game to a symmetrical position with a bit less tension than we are used to in the French defense. So the upside is, of course, the taking on d5 is far from the best move at white's disposal. And what's more important, very often, people who play this as white are not going to be very ambitious and will try to play for a draw. And I think one important point is that I will show some lines to early on unbalance the position a bit, but we shouldn't get too crazy about trying to push for a win. In my experience, it's enough to keep the game going. You know, sooner or later, there's going to be some interesting moments, and the more questions you keep asking your opponent, the more likely is that something will happen. You'll get chances, there will be mistakes. So with that said, let's see the main options for white. So I want to start with c4, which is the most enterprising move at white's disposal. So yeah, there are some people who try to be a bit ambitious here. And I like playing bishop b4 check, which underlines that c4 is a bit early. Knight c3. And now, after the normal development moves, this is kind of the main position. And here there's a very classical way to play, which is d takes c4, bishop c4, knight bd7. And then this knight is headed to b6, where it tries to control the critical square in front of the isolated white pawn. So it's a very solid setup, but as I said, the opponents who choose to play the exchange French, they want to still keep things under control, and given a chance, it would be nice to fight for the initiative. And to that end, I very much like the move knight c6. So the idea is that after castles, we play d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and now instead of, playing for the blockade on d5, we are resorting to the much more ambitious strategy of actually pressuring this weak pawn. So therefore bishop g4 is very logical, and I already quite like this position for black. So if f3, that's a move that weakens white's king, we just go back bishop f5, and on bishop g5 we can go bishop e7, just to diffuse this pin from the bishop g5. And I think generally speaking, having played f3 is not so great for white. So more logical is to play probably h3, ask the bishop where he's going. Here I'm taking on e2, and now a super important move. Also, just to take a moment here, why after h3 am I taking on e2? I think if we go, for example, to h5, then the moment the white queen is going somewhere, then knight f4 can also become an idea. So I think the bishop doesn't need, to stay in the game. It is actually doing its job by, not losing any time, but now bishop a5, that is the key move. And we want to reroute this bishop to go to b6, where it will obviously put pressure on this weak pawn. And if this pawn were ever to move to d5, then this bishop on c4 is really blunted. Like, it doesn't want this pawn to move forward. And in a way, playing d5, white is just relinquishing control over the dark squares. The bishop would get very strong on b6. On the other hand, if white ends up defending on the pawn on d4, then, as you said, the next moves are going to be doubling on the d file, like queen d7 or queen d6 and rook a d8. So I think this is already quite a pleasant position for black if one knows this maneuver with bishop a5 b6. And of course here, if white were to play a3, then we are super happy, because anyways we want to play bishop a5. So all in all, I think this is quite a satisfactory position for black, and I'm not even sure how white should play this. So here, kind of the more classical moves are to play knight f3 or bishop d3, and we will try to get a similar setup for black. So after knight f3, I want to play knight c6, bishop d3, bishop d6. Here's an important moment, since there's a popular setup playing bishop g4, and then trying to castle queenside as black. This is very ambitious, and actually I want to caution you guys from maybe staying away from this plan. So I will show how black could develop, because up to here what black did is very normal. But it is very difficult to attack white's king, since the pawn shield is intact. Like there's no like real hook that we can use to open lines, while on the other side, white has this easy plan with b4 where he already starts disturbing our coordination with b5 incoming. So for example, knight g6 to have a square to retreat to with the other knight in some lines. But of course, going to e7 is also a little bit passive. But if you go knight a5, then it continues. Queen a4. Here there was a game where black actually lost very quickly, playing knight f4, bishop f1. It looks nice, but doesn't achieve anything, the knight on f4. Now finally the knight had to be defended on a5, and now there's knight e5. Very unpleasant. So it has to be taken. Now we see that actually the knight on f4 is very loose, because the queen is attacking everything on the fourth rank. And white's attack somehow is developing without any effort. And here I think it was already extremely bad for black, and the game ended very quickly like this, and the knight coming to c6. So as I said, with this pawn shield intact, it is very difficult to actually get something going, while I don't like that we give such a easy attacking plan for white with b4, b5. So I would stay away from this whole plan and instead play bishop d6. Or another idea is actually here knight b4 to unbalance the position immediately. So after bishop e2, since nobody wants to give up the bishops, there's bishop f5, forcing white's knight to a3. And now we can be very cheeky, go back knight c6, and the threat is simply to take on a3 and disrupt white's pawn structure. So that's kind of one idea, and going back for like a more standard setup, bishop d6, castles, knight g7, c3. Here black simply has no problems after bishop f5. Soon we will castle kingside and everything is just looking good. So you can see there's a choice for black of how to play this position, and I would just stay away from castling queenside. And now we've looked at knight f3. White can also play bishop d3 here, and there I would play knight c6 to get the same type of position, like this. So that there are not too many different ideas for black. And I had omitted one thing. There's of course always a lot of move order topics, some possibilities that are at white's or black's disposal just because of the move order chosen. For example, after knight f3, knight c6, black needs to know this move bishop b5, after which play becomes basically very forced. Bishop d6, this is all theory and one just has to know it. dc4, d5, a6, bishop a4, b5. That was the only way to break the pin. Takes, takes. So our pawns are disrupted on a4, c4, but we have the bishop pair. Castles knight e7, knight bd2, bishop e6, defending the pawn. So now of course we don't want that white just takes the pawn back and keeps his pawn structure healthy. So since we cannot keep this pawn, at least we disrupt white's pawn structure. c3, that's a nice motive. bc, and now we try to take back on c6. And after knight d4 castles, basically there's one trick to know, and that kind of finishes the line. So c4 is the very obvious move. And here we will reveal the point. Bishop takes c6. And what would happen after queen takes c6 here?
Right, something. Oh, so yeah. So there's a rook in the bounce not defended anymore. So maybe there's some like tactic that attacks the rook on a1.
Definitely. So after queen c6,
Yeah, so queen f6, queen f6. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very nice double attack, because we will either take on a1 or win the queen with bishop takes h2 check.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, since white cannot take the knight, then black is just totally fine here. And I went through these moves quickly because they're actually really natural. I mean, when we see this position from knight e7, developing, attacking on c6, bishop e6 is developing and defending on c4. Now here was a key idea to, give the pawn up so that it disrupts white's structure, since we cannot keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So also quite natural. Now we attack the c6 pawn, which is a nuisance. We have to finish development, and then there was just this one trick. So I think it's actually very straightforward. When you have looked at this line once with a bit of patience and kind of gotten the ideas behind the moves, it's easy to remember, I believe. Is there anything you want to revisit?
Yes, the classical position that we get from the knight f3, bishop e3 line, we have bishop f5. So I need to have sort of next steps after we get the position with the tension of the bishops and bishop f5. So d6, knight g7, bishop f5. A lot of people I see playing against me just trying to trade up everything. Like maybe something like queen c2 happens, and they try to put pressure and trade everything off and draw. Okay,
I see. So of course we can take on d3, but I like to keep the tension, in white to improve my pieces instead of, taking on d3. So I play queen d7.
Yeah, I can probably go with like bishop g5 here.
Okay.
Trying to reroute to g3 and trade that one.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's say I castle.
Okay, knight b2.
Here I will try to make something happen. So I'll take.
Queen takes back.
And queen f5.
Okay.
And my idea is that probably you want to take on f5, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But now, kind of this bishop on g5 is corralled by my knight.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go bishop h4, at the very least I can take it, and then we have some kind of unbalance.
Yeah, that's true. So they're really trying to be stubborn not to try to, trade the bishop for the knight. Maybe knight b3, try to go to c5 is another idea. And also if they go attacking the bishop, they'll go bishop b2 back, for example.
Yeah.
And if there's any rook e8, they'll go rook e1, try to... Okay, this is... Okay, then
I'll just limit you.
Yeah.
But you wanted to know in terms of plans. So let's say you do something like this, right?
Yeah.
I will go f6, you go, let's say, here.
Mm-hmm.
I go king f7, covering e6. And usually what I like to do is advance my pawns here.
Okay.
And then eventually, I'm always ready to disturb white's coordination. And maybe I exchange one rook on e8 and keep the other rook, since there's nothing going on the e file. And if I ever open up lines, then the rook will be useful.
Yeah.
And I feel that, that this is quite a pleasant scenario for black, because this bishop on d6 is better than the counterpart on d2.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we have this simple plan of expansion on the king's side. Because we have the pawn on f6, which limits the knight on f3.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is kind of positionally not a good piece.
Yeah.
We can see that it's quite nice to have this setup with knight f5 and pawn on f6.
Yeah, but saying that, what if they go here, like h4, to block g5?
Yeah, good point. So here I will say that I like fixing the pawn on the dark square, since you have the dark squared bishop.
Yeah, and they go rook e2.
Okay, so I think I'll exchange one rook, as promised.
Rook e1. So, yep, and then what to do for black?
Yeah, so the c6 knight is not, having any purpose so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I probably put it on e6, like this.
Okay.
And then I see that I have this pawn break with c5.
Yeah.
So I will entertain this idea. And either you will relinquish your center, which will give me more options, or I will push to c4.
Yeah.
And then my pawn avalanche is coming on this side as well.
I see.
Eventually b4, and black starts to be much better.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. And yeah, I've won many games in kind of this style as black. So now we are going to look at a kind of unusual move, since the main lines are knight to c3 or knight to d2, which is kind of natural. Usually in the openings, the knights come out before the bishops. So there is this move bishop d3, which we are going to check. And the justification is that after taking on e4, this bishop is on this so-called long diagonal, kind of staring down on black's queen side, which sometimes can cause issues for development. But at the same time, this bishop on e4 is exposed. So knight f6, it has to withdraw back to f3, and in most openings, the bishop appears on the diagonal by way of fianchetto. That would be by playing g3, and the bishop would have a nice home on g2, where it cannot be harassed by black knight. And we will see that the bishop on f3 not only takes away the natural square for development for the white knight, but he's also subject to being attacked. So we do the usual in the structure for black. It's chipping away at white center, so c5 is natural. Knight e2, knight c6. So white has to support the pawn on d4. And as usual, against lines that are not, the most correct, there are options for black. But I want to suggest something very straightforward here. It's taking on d4, knight takes d4, knight e5, to really underline that this bishop on f3 is placed in an unnatural way. So if it were to withdraw, then we can just play knight d5 and play bishop e7, and we are very happy. We've already pushed white back. There is no advantage for white to speak of. Actually, I prefer to be black. So that's not an option. So if castles, we don't need to rush, because really the bishop withdrawing is a concession, so we just develop. Knight c3, castles. And now white has to decide if rook e1, already knight c4 is a good move. Attacking b2 and e3, and having to play bishop c1 is already a very bad sign, and black is starting to take over with e5 here. So queen e2 is a bit more circumspect, not allowing knight c4. And now we just continue developing. Queen c7, rook a1, bishop d7, rook e1, rook fd8. And basically, white has run out of useful moves to make, and black is about to finish up development too, and one day we'll just chop off this bishop and enjoy the bishop pair with a flawless structure. So there's absolutely nothing to worry about. So what's the point of white's setup? He has to play a bit more ambitiously and not castle. White needs to play knight c3. And if we were to play bishop e7 now, how could white mix it up? What would be a more aggressive development plan? What do you think, Matthew?
Because the development plan is possibly, well, if you say aggressive, maybe g4.
Not in that sense, aggressive.
Okay. Just saying that, anticipating the kingside castle, so why not launch a pawn storm?
Yes, but the pawn storm will not really do any damage since there is no hook. I mean, if black had a pawn on h6, okay, I would see the argument, but white's king is still in the middle, so white will not be successful if he's not at least finishing his development first, which involves castling.
Yeah, that's the only thing about the knight f6 will be just pushed away with g4, g5, and just misplacing that knight somewhere. And also, the knight has to go back to g8 or just d5, and which is probably going to be trade off a knight and have an isolated pawn for black. So maybe not. Yeah,
but I can tell you that after g4, I'm not going to be phased. I will just play something like. Actually, I may take here. And for example, knight d7. Okay. Now g5 is hanging.
Oh yeah, so h4 defend that one.
Yeah, knight e5.
Okay, in this case, maybe some like queen e4 attacking the knight.
Yeah, here I thought I would have knight c4.
Okay, so now maybe bishop c1 again. The same logic we talked about before, but maybe queenside castle is also an option instead of bishop.
Yeah, that's a better option, but I will have queen b3 here. Queen b6. And next I will take on e3.
I see. Makes sense.
So I mean, it doesn't look promising to me for white.
So if they go, for example, queen e3, the endgame is better for black?
Oh yeah, that is for sure.
Okay, because simply better pawn structure.
Yeah, because what I will do, I play a rook d8, and if we exchange here, I think I can just bring my king to the center. And then I get out bishop d7, and I have two bishops, and any moment I can start opening the position, and there are no weaknesses.
I see. Makes sense.
And actually, I feel like I played a bit too passively. I should not take on
f3.
On f3, because I help white develop. I think I don't mind this, for example.
Okay, that makes sense. So knight d5 from white.
Yeah, but now what do you do?
I'll just preserve the maybe. Well, so they have to defend h5, so h4.
Yes.
Just saying that.
Yeah, I thought that I can cause some problems already, since it's not clear how you get the king out now.
Okay, so no like bishop g2 here. You're getting this queen free for the move.
Yeah, then I will go knight c4.
Okay. So the same thing, and also attacking e3 some more. That's not positive.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, no.
In that case, maybe bishop e2 instead. Not bishop e2, but bishop e2.
I can do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this saying that the same thing will happen. You're gonna have to do some concessions. Bishop c4, but it's not the best option.
Yeah, basically you haven't achieved anything by pushing the g-pawn.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it cost you time, and your king is still only one.
Okay, so this is only a.
So yeah, I
maybe
think
just
95.
Attacks. I want to make sure we're safe.
But yeah, we explode some ideas. So what I was getting at is that white should play queen e2 here, and castle queenside. That's kind of the aggressive way. And here, for example, there are some issues. If I play queen c7, king b1, now there are already kind of threats with bishop f4, knight db5. Like I need to be very careful here. So what I like, or what I think is a very clever move here, is to play a6. This b5 square is usually very important in these structures because the knights can jump there any moment. So we control the square. Now queen e2, and now we take on f3. And after queen takes f3, we have prepared to play e5, since now there is no knight db5. And another important point is that knight f5, which looks very desirable, is no good on account of queen a5. And white has to remove the king from this pin, and then there is e4. And suddenly the knight drops. So that means that here after e5, there's simply no really good move for white. They have to play knight e2, but that's kind of a sign that things didn't go well if you cannot play knight f5. And here I like to go queen c7 so that I can develop the c8 bishop, bishop e6. Now bishop g5 is kind of to try to do something, and here I would just offer the exchange of queens. Because, of course, we are a bit behind in development, but we have the two bishops, and exchanging queens will kind of fix everything, because then our king in the center is no source of concern anymore, and knights play well with the queen, bishops play well with the rooks, so exchanging queens is always kind of a good idea when you have the pair of bishops. And if white were to take, then already the idea is to play knight d5, f6, but everything starts to look very nice for black. So to me, kind of, this is the important position. If white is castling short, then it's really very simple. There are no problems here. Also note that after bishop f4, we always have to check. Knight takes f3, and knight db5 is not achieving anything yet. We have queen a5, and here we can just ask questions to the knight, which cannot do any damage yet. So really the key moment kind of to remember in this line is that after knight c3, when white keeps this option alive of castling queenside, we are already playing a6. And then queen e2, takes, and e5.
So that was a moment when you talked about there was no problem to be had. When there's bishop to 4 and there's knight b5 attack, there's actually the line that I thought there's knight c7.
Okay. You mean this one?
Yeah, that one, knight c7, attacking the rook. Is
Yes.
there a problem here?
We go rook a7. It looks for a moment really silly, but what about the knight on c7? It has nowhere to go.
Okay, there's nothing that they can put the pressure on, and bishop e3 is not anything because of b6?
Bishop e3, there are many problems with this move. I could even, I think, just take it and then play b6.
The classic Bobby Fischer versus Vasily match. Let's see.
Yeah, but I mean, after b6...
The dice trapped a little bit.
Okay, here there's something to calculate,
C6,
you know, queen c6.
Yeah.
But I don't think this works at all, to be honest. Like, here at the very, very least, I'm taking back on b2.
Okay.
And I'm already doing very well. But it's all, you know, no use. It's just to show that everywhere the question is is black winning on the spot or not. So I think queen c7 is actually just winning here.
I see, makes sense.
But yeah, it's good to know this motive that we have a7 for the rook, because of course this would be quite unfortunate. Here there is, for example, knight a6 and the rook is hanging on b8. Anything else?
Yeah, I was wondering about how the endgame is. If they do d takes c5, once you go c5, what does that look like?
Okay, so we go back to the start.
Yeah, they dig on c5 with a d pawn.
Oh, right away?
Yeah, see what the result is of that one.
So how do you take with the bishop?
Possibly with the king to just have the pressure on b7 more.
Okay, but now you have a problem on f2.
Yeah, go. You can do bishop b3 maybe, develop and defend too.
Okay, so I'll take this. I wouldn't be happy with white's pawn structure here.
Yeah, it's a slight issue, but the goal is to suffocate black in the sense that there's no winning chances, and then maybe the e pawn is not in an open file at all, so maybe not concerned. So
yeah, so the problem is that my knight is gonna go to e5 and will just be very well positioned. It will not, kill you right away, but it's kind of a very dominating piece. And black's development is very simple. I will go king e7, my rook goes to d8, then if b2 is not defended, I can just go bishop d7, because if you take on b7, rook b8, and I have an attack on b2, I get the pawn back with dividends. And if for some reason b2 is defended, then I can just spend the tempo playing rook b8 and then develop the bishop. And it's kind of a sad position for white, because black structure is perfect, the pieces will be centralized, the knight on e5 is unassailable, so positionally speaking, black is just for choice.
I see. With that being said, maybe with the bishop takes d1, not the king takes d1 back.
Yeah.
Was the situation there?
Okay, so how do you want to proceed here?
So maybe an f3, natural development?
Yes. That's a good one, about natural development, because I like to put the bishop on b7 in the structure. Let's say you castle, right?
Yeah.
Actually, here I could already start to disturb you with something like bishop a6 and knight g4.
Okay, that one.
So it kind of shows that black setup is very harmonious and white has issues.
I see.
Even if I don't do that, just playing, bishop b7, knight d7, castles, rook d8, rook c8, black's development is very, very harmonious. And I have access to the central squares like knight e4, and your bishop on d1 is kind of in the way of finishing development. At the same time, you need him to cover f3, so that I don't kill the pawn structure. So already white is actually much worse, even if I don't underline it like that. Okay guys, so today we're going to look at a kind of very strategic approach to fight the French defense from white. And that's the so-called King's Indian attack, and it's a system opening, a bit like the London. So you have your planners white where you put your pieces, and then after 10 moves or so, the game kind of starts. And we are going to look at a very classical approach here. So since it's a system opening, kind of the King's Indian attack approach is to put the bishop on g2. And of course, there are many ways to play as black, but there's one that I've kind of played as mainline my whole life, and I think is a very good one. So basically up to here, it's all normal developing moves, and as usual in a King's Indian, the King's Indian player wants to play on the king's side. So it's clear that e4, e5 is coming. And that gives white a space advantage on the king side, so black in turn wants to play on the queen side and already prepares a space gain here. So there are some games where white takes on d5, but that's not really principled, so we're not going to look at that. e5, knight d7, knight f1, bishop b7. Soon it will become clear why black is starting with this development and doesn't play a5, for example, yet. So h4, this is kind of still all system for white, because the advance of the h-pawn is kind of useful in weakening or inducing a weakening of black's king side. Also, it stops any possible g5 in case, white puts the bishop here. It can't be disturbed with g5 anymore. So queen c7, bishop f4, and now very subtle, rook fc8. So we are preparing the return of the queen to d8, and as I said, things will become clearer as we go on. And it's important to do all of this quickly, because now that the bishop has landed on f4, and that would be threatening something like knight d5 and e6, kind of like a discovery. So, bishop looking here, the e-pawn could advance and attack the knight. So here black would be in time to play queen d8. So that's why it's important to start with this bishop b7, to have rook fc8 and queen d8 quite quickly. So anyways, we're following a game, knight 1 h2, queen d8. The stem game is a game between Linier Dominguez Perez with black playing Amin Bassemas white, who was the #1 African player, sometimes above 2700, and he is a practitioner of the King's Indian attack his whole life. So it's kind of interesting how black managed to get a good position against him. But along these lines I also have some games. I want to quickly show something here. So in my game, after h5, we go h6. So that's like the first very key idea, that in the system we do not allow white to kind of take the pawn all the way to h6, because then after g6 we would have holes all around our king, and they are long term, they don't go away, we don't want that. So we play h6, c3, a5, queen d2, and here I did something interesting, because I have vacated the f8 square, putting the rook here. I need this to organize my defenses. So one way is to eventually drop back with the bishop to f8, bolstering indirectly this pawn on h6 against any possible sacrifices. And another idea, to kind of be even more secure on the king side, is to bring the knight all the way to h7 and then perhaps put the bishop on f8. This is what I did in the game. So my opponent played a4. I kept everything fluid here, knight g4, knight h7. And here I've completed my, so to say, defensive setup. And basically white's play on the king side is completely halted, because sacrificing on h6 will kind of just lose a piece, and there is no real follow-up to the action, because already I got the knight here, the queen could swing over to the king side immediately, and there are just no reinforcements once white has given up everything on h6. So that means that basically the king side is sealed, and black has a free hand on the other side of the board. And we'll just quickly go through this game. So already we see white has no ideas, and I'm strengthening my position. Eventually I gave up a pawn here to clear the way. I was sure I would win this pawn back eventually. So my pieces enter. Knight a7, very nice. Also going against this weakness. And we see, white was just marking time. I took the pawn back. And eventually the game was decided on the queen side, playing against white's weakness on c3. So here there were exchanges, and then in the end everything was dropping. So that's kind of to illustrate the strategic ideas. And yeah, we are talking about the opening as such and what to do with black. But as I said, when we play against the King's Indian attack, it becomes a very strategic game. So it's not so much about knowing, finesses in the early on, but to understand what's going on in the ensuing positions, like what's the strategic picture, what we are playing for, and then we need to find the right ideas accordingly. So I think this knight f8, knight h7 was an interesting twist. And in our stem game, similar things happened. Here normally if white wouldn't do anything on the queen side, but just continue knight g4, then we stop the pawn, and before there's too much action on h6 we defend with bishop f8. And this is always a solid setup, and this knight can potentially also be rerouted here. And idea is the same. We want to lock down the king side and then develop our play on the queen side. And there are all kinds of breaks possible on the queen side, with d4, with b4, sometimes even some combination of c4 and a3. So there's room for creativity. So let's go back to the stem game. yeah, here a very important moment. So we do not want to get our side closed. So if we were playing b4, then basically after c4 and b3, there would be no way to open up the queen side anymore, and white would have achieved something similar as to what we are trying to do on the king side. So I don't like b4 in this scenario. If the black pawn were already on a4, then this pawn will not be so easily defended. And if a pawn appears on b3, that itself would become a weakness, the a file opened. But with white's pawn on a4, this is like lockdown of the queen side. So it's either playing bishop a6 or taking on a4. So in the game, bishop a6. And basically white started to attack, but knight on h3 is not very impressive, but the path for the queen is opened. So black continues play on the queen side. And since the d3 pawn is always falling if the queen were to go to g4, white started some kind of combinatorial attack. So playing c4, dc4, queen g4, burning the bridges, but at least not having the bishop appear on d3 from which he could return also to the defenses. And yeah, here ultimately black did prevail in the game, didn't play the very best defense here. So queen f8 was the best, and after knight f4, knight c3, takes on a8, knight h5, there was a key move, rook a4. You see, it's like everything quite concrete, so you know it's kind of the position where the guy who plays better that they will win. But yeah, here it's a black win. And yeah, in the game after bishop f8, white didn't find a way to crash through, had some chances, but here knight came to the defense on e7, and somehow white ran out of ideas, played bishop g5, which was too meek, and then black is just too fast here. And yeah, nice touch with rook a1, just want to crash through on d1, and of course this bishop on b5 is a very strong piece. This king is weak forever. The bishop can also drop back to c6, so strategically it's a disaster. And here the game also ended pretty quickly. A couple more moves, but yeah, that's enough.
There's a couple of things I want to look at from the lines you showed me.
Yes.
The one that we're just determining where do you want to put the knight on f8 or the bishop on f8? There's a line where the bishop went to f8 instead.
Yes.
And was there any possibility that white can try to build up a sacking opportunities and sack twice, maybe g4, g5 to break through that way?
Okay, so two questions. One, if a sacrifice on h6 is ever worthwhile, right? Like here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the second, plans for g4, g5. Okay.
Yeah.
So here we get to a kind of a logical position to discuss this, because as I said, here it's kind of the normal follow-up. Don't touch the queen side as white, but build up. So knight g4, h5, h6, queen d2 to h6, bishop f8, and now we have nothing more to do as white, so we take, yeah. Or maybe with the bishop actually, it looks a bit more forcing. And here I would take everything and queen f8. So of course the queen needs to withdraw. Queen f4, I think. I go queen g7. Now I bring my defenders. So if you go h6, I go queen g6. If you go knight h4, I'm saying that you misplaced the knight now, because it's attacking so as kind of g5. So I go queen h7, and next I will go king h8, rook g8, and my king is totally safe. And I can also at some point bring the other knight or try to exchange something. So I have the situation very much under control here.
Yeah, with that being said, instead of h5, maybe g4 from white.
Yes. But okay, you mean
after the sacks.
Knight g4.
No, it's like the sacks. Yeah.
Okay.
So the sacks come in, queen goes to f8 and queen f4, and then instead of queen 7 a6,
yes.
g4. I'm trying to do g5, especially this way. Any difference here?
Yeah, it's a good point. Let's think. I'm hesitating for a moment because I want to play king g8, king h8 and rook g8. This kind of disturbs me a little bit, but I just go rook f8 here. And like generally speaking, like I'm a piece up and there's kind of no way to really attack, so I can take my time to, just bring defenders. Knight e7, knight g8, knight h6, the knight defends f7 from there, then I suddenly have rook g8. So I will start to just push you back. And I have no idea how white in the meantime could really make headway.
Okay, sounds good. And the second question is, what if they go c3 earlier, let's say on move 6, before bishop g2 happened? They go c3. I see sometimes people play early c3 to go d4 fast.
Okay, like this.
Yeah. Trying to go D4.
96.
All right. So do E5 and D4? Yes.
Yes.
So
this looks quite strange to me because it's reminiscent of this knight D2 French, but you kind of lost the tempo as white, so this shouldn't be working out at all, I think. So for instance, if I take here, like there are lots of things I like. Let's say Queen B6. Yeah, you kind of have to play Knight B3 here just to protect on D4. And I would go A5. Now, if I get to play F4, it's unpleasant, so if you stop me, I go here. And already here you cannot take back properly, because you need to defend on B3. So this all looks very wrong. Like already after A5, I think there's no good move for white. So now we are back to more of a mainline system. So in our starting position, we look at Knight D2, so-called Tarrasch French. And here there's a very interesting line that leads to very lively play, and that's Bishop E7. So black is kind of waiting for white to make a commitment, because after Knight Gf3, we play Knight F6, and now we are saying that kind of the knights, they are standing on each other's feet. So this typical structure after E5 is not so easy to play for white. Because ideally, I mean, white likes the F-pawn on F4 and also not have the knights covering each other, but, you know, more, they can cover more ground when they're not in each other's way. Plus, development is a bit difficult. Knight on D2 is still in the way of Bishop C1. But anyways, still a serious line from white's perspective also. And here, of course, Knight C6 is the main move. I just want to put out as an idea, it's also possible to play B6 here and just exchange the bad French bishop on A6. So anyone who likes that, I would endorse this as well. But kind of more ambitious is Knight C6, castles, and here G5 is quite a cool idea. And it doesn't have the idea that it has. So even if it was our move, we wouldn't play G4 yet. Well, I will just make a waiting move to illustrate this, A3. Even here we won't do it, because we don't want to allow this Queen G4, and there's suddenly Queen G7, which disrupts our coordination on the king's side. But what we're actually doing with G5 is we make the natural development for white impossible. Because if black played something else, it would be very natural to play Rook E1, then Knight F1, Knight G3, bring the knight out like this, free the bishop. But now Rook E1 isn't possible because after G4 the knight has nowhere to go. It's just lost. So this G5 is really irritating for white. So H3 is kind of the worst move one can play because of the H5, the possibility of G4 is renewed, but now black would also be opening up at least one file on the king side, and the king doesn't have to castle. He can of course go the queen side. So H3 makes very little sense. So if white plays Queen E2, that's interesting move. Still not really getting out, but we will not play G4. We further our development. Queen E3 makes some sense. So now we can play G4 because G4 will not be hanging. And we get like a very, very tense position where kind of the white pieces are not where they want to be. Black can castle queenside, and yeah, position just remains very tense. For black, the idea is to, after castling, we could bring the d8 rook to e8 to kind of prepare f5 and have the rook cover e6 if there's an exchange on f6. Or the rook could go to g8, and then we would have to remove the bishop from e7, say to f8, h6, and bring the knight to f5. So lots of things going on, and also white finds it difficult to kind of arrange his pieces. So let's go back. So popular way for white to play is to release the tension here, go dc5. But this entails actually giving up all of a sudden a whole pawn. But there's a point, so people who are really deeply prepared, they would know they can play knight g5 here. And now I have a question for you. What would you do as black?
Okay, first thing to look at is can I take the knight g5 with the queen? If they do that, they have some sort of discovery on the queen side. For example, knight e4 is a possibility. Attack the queen twice, and also bishop c5 saying.
Exactly. So this is what would be happening until bishop g5.
That'd be annoying.
Yes, indeed, because white is going to win the piece back.
Yeah. So probably not desirable to do that.
No. Actually, the line kind of continues. It's very forcing.
Okay.
So here gf is not possible because then rook g8. So it kind of goes to a position like this where white has the two bishops and therefore some advantage. So that's not desirable.
So yeah, with that in mind, we can't do that. Is there anything we can do in the meantime? Is there any benefit for black since that we have open lines? Maybe bishop d6 back, and then prepare for this. Well, maybe this along f4. So maybe bishop b6 back to be able to save the bishop from any sort of attacks.
Yes, bishop b6 is one good move, of course. Then there's a real threat taking the knight on g5.
Yeah.
But I have like a general rule in such situations when we are still in the opening.
Okay.
To me, we should not forget that the goal of the opening is to, well, of course, fight for the center, but mainly develop our pieces. So, when I have no clear orientation, what my next move should achieve, or there's nothing to react to, like my baseline is to always further development.
Yeah.
And that would make me very much consider bishop d7 here.
Oh, okay.
Because also my king needs to go to the queen side, so bishop d7 is a necessary move. It furthers my development, and it's just good here actually.
Let's see.
And if white plays queen h5, we go h6. Now it needs to cover g5, for example, with knight b3, we go bishop d6, we are happy. Next we can go like queen c7, then castle, and we have a very nice position. Because white has given up the center, and not so clear what white is playing for here.
What if they go f4 here?
Then we have also queen b6 with tempo.
Oh, queen b6.
Give it a check. Yes, and then we castle, because now after fe we can just take on g5 with tempo.
I see. That way, okay.
Yeah, that's a nice one. And then suddenly everything will collapse here, yeah. So there are some alternatives here for white. For example, bishop d3. Here we go c5. dc5, knight f6. So whenever white plays e5, then the knight is going d7 and takes back on c5. So here a5 is kind of turns out to be a very good move because both sides are waiting, and now this knight goes out to a6. We of course don't want to put it on d7 because the other knight needs that square, and like c6 is possible, but we actually want to take back on c5. So that's why a5 was kind of to just prepare knight a6. So now more waiting doesn't have a point for white because anyways c5 is gonna fall, so e5 made sense. Knight d7. Here there are some moves. For example, c4. Knight takes c5, bishop c2, preserving the bishop, and here b6 is good. So the bishop can come to a6, where it will be kind of annoying. And also going to b7 makes sense. Yeah, bishop would recapture then on d5, and those are good positions for black. Everything is out. Rook will come to c8, and we can at any point also play queen c7. Like we just have a naturally developed position. So if white doesn't go c4, but more restrained c3, then an important motive to know here is to play b5. Because, yeah, we like to play on the queen side in these positions, and here b5 cannot be captured because there is always bishop a6. And again, this issues with the rook on f1. And a nice moment here is that after knight d4, it's actually we're following a game of Wesley So, queen c7 attacking on e5, kind of winning a tempo, and we go b4 and already got our play going. So I think this is also quite satisfactory for black, and there's a last move we should look at here as white going e5, and just kind of saying, okay, you've put your bishop on e7, now where's your knight from g8 going? So c5, here there are two moves, one is queen g4, need to defend on g7, so we go king f8. Looks a bit odd, but in a close position we do not necessarily need to worry about the king there, and we will see how black develops on the king side. So dc5, knight c6, queen g3 covering e5, and now we are kind of making some headway here. Knight b3, h4. It's kind of typical. When the queen is out early, there are always ways to disturb her. Now white needs to keep a connection to the e5 pawn, therefore queen e3. Now the knight is coming from this side. And basically, black has found some way to reasonably develop on the king side. And here the position is again quite tense. So I think that in general, black needs to fight for the initiative here, because he has this iffy king on f8, and if white were to develop perfectly, bishop d3, castle, bishop d2, put the rook on e1, he will stabilize and not only start to push black back because he can take on f5, but it's also still a pawn up. But it's not so easy. Black will strike first. So after bishop d3, like I said, we need to look for ways to fight for the initiative, and here it's going g5. So takes is forced, takes, queen e5 is a check, so bishop e2 forced, rook g8, and suddenly there's a problem on g2. So black has taken over. That means bishop d3 is no good. If white plays the more restrained bishop e2, we can just prepare g5 at rook g8, and I think black has good play. So this kind of all a sample line, because after queen g4, king f8, we get a very unorthodox position, but like this idea with h5 developing the knight through h6, that then becomes very typical. So more orthodox way to play for white would be with c3, keep your center intact. And here, if we play seemingly natural moves, knight c6, bishop d3. Here knight takes d4 is not such a good idea, like in an earlier line there's queen g4 and g7 folds, but developing with knight h6. Here knight df3 leads to a good position for white. Now the other knight can go to e2, and white is able to take this knight at any point with the c1 bishop, so I don't like this. So here we need to act more decisively as black, and that's by immediately attacking the pawn on d4. So here knight f3 makes sense, because white really wants to untangle the knights in this way, not put the other knight on f3, after which, again, he would have to react and put this knight then on the bad b3 square. So knight df3 is logical. And now we solve our development problems in the following way. We go bishop b4 check, which vacates the e7 square potentially for the g8 knight. And basically white's moves were kind of the most obvious ones. And black is okay in this type of position because the pawn is not on f4. So that means that with f7, f6, we successfully undermine white's pawn chain in the center, and then we can either go knight h6, knight f7, put pressure on e5, or develop with knight e7, and yeah, then castle, and we have quite a decent position.
And another line I've played in the game was with the g5 line after the castle. That one. So yeah, g5. I played a couple games where white played g4 here.
Wow.
And g4, f h5, h3, and try to do king h g2, rook h1 ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting. It's an interesting idea.
So I've had this in a couple of games. This black.
So I have doubts.
Oh yeah.
But let's see.
Yeah. Saying that you're not developed enough on the queen side, I'll just take your h file.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't take g4.
Okay, for starters, I'm taking this, and I go queen b6.
Okay, the primary impression. This one was just king g2. Just all for the h file.
But d4 is hanging.
Well, maybe a gambit. This case will do like CD. Yeah, this one. Don't take that back. Just like do rook h1. Saying that I want to just penetrate in the h file. So what about this one?
I don't believe it. So now, of course, I have some issue finishing my development, but I have a clear goal. I want to play bishop d7 and castle, so I will go knight f8 here, just to achieve that. Okay. Then bishop d7 next, and I would be ready to castle.
I see. There's nothing like, for example, queen h5 to help white to attack g5, for example.
Yeah, it's a good move. Let's see.
So now bishop g7 will take it in g5.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's going on here. So let's say I go here.
Let's take on g5.
You take it. I very much want to play this one.
Okay, f7 is no problem.
Yeah, my hope is that you don't have a good way to untangle here.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, so there's no solution to this one. It's hard to believe that. So, yikes. No. No G.
Difficult. Yeah.
G5.
G5, I can take on F7 and then on G5. I don't mind this.
Okay, this is no problem for in this case. So yeah, one more thought is that instead of sacking the D pawn, when you go back to like knight c6, instead of sacking the D pawn, let's say if they go knight to B, oh no, they can't go knight b3. Like
there's C4.
Like taking c5 here is white. Taking c5 here is white.
Yeah.
Is there like a more fighting?
So here I'm not sure which way I go. Because even this one is interesting to quickly take on e5.
Yeah,
but okay, it's maybe a bit too much. So let's say I go knight c5, then you go here.
G2, yeah. Bishop d7? Is it too quick?
Yeah, there's some b4 move.
Oh, that's true.
That disturbs me. So maybe I need to be so clever.
Yeah.
Oh, I can also just take here. Because now I'm putting pressure on e5.
There's no queen e2 things?
Yeah, there is. So no, I somehow feel like I should do my clever queen c7, because this pawn is really the most important one.
Yeah. No, let's say they say white says, okay, pawn for pawn, they go, for example, knight b3, saying that I want to take g5.
Oh, but you're gonna get mated on h2.
Oh, I forgot that one. So scratch that idea. So I can't allow that one. So there's no defense of the e5 pawn this way. But in that case, is there any hope for king g2 here? Probably not, because it's knight e5 and bishop g2.
Yeah, now things are hanging on g4 and 23.
Yeah.
That's
no
too
time.
much.
No time.
Yeah.
So I think that does it. I thought there was something clever here, but there's none.